Shalom. I'm Rabbi Nathan Davidovich, speaking to you on behalf of the webyeshiva.org, speaking to you from Efrat. I hope that as I'm speaking to you, that you and your loved ones are well and avoiding the horrible calamities that are taking place around the world, in every country in the world. And I hope that you are listening to what those with some knowledge tell you. I want to talk a little bit about this week's Parsha, which is Parsha Vayikra. Just a few minutes ago, I got off of a conference, a Zoom conference, which is now the rage, with a client in a case, and she was talking about how she was treated by her employer, her former employer. And it was just unbelievable to hear the power trip that this person was putting on her. You know, I've been practicing law a long time, and I've seen this before. My paralegal was on the line also, and she broke out in tears. And I was just wondering, you know, what relation does this have to this Parsha? The concept of somebody trying to be better than somebody else, trying to hold something over. We can learn from this Parsha Vayikra the concept of humility. And we can learn how it relates to sacrifices and how it relates to Passover, which is coming up just 2 weeks from today. I wish everybody a Chodesh Tov, a happy month of Nisan. In this Parsha, the Torah tells us as follows. It talks about certainly the whole book of Vayikra, of Leviticus, is a book about offerings to God. The word korban, karev, is from the Hebrew word lekarev, to come closer to God. What the book is telling us ways to come closer to God. One of the offerings that are mentioned is a korban mincha, which is a flour offering, which is an offering by a poor person. And there's a very interesting statement in this parsha. It says, Kol ha-mincha asher takrivu l'Hashem, every mincha offering that you give to God, that you offer to God, lo sa'aser chometz, you shouldn't make it chometz. Well, we all know what chometz is. We're about to go into Pesach, and a lot of us are kind of out of our minds. How do we get everything done when we're all in isolation? So here this Torah is telling us about chometz. Don't put chometz, leavened product, on this korban mincha. It says ki chol or v'chol davash, all leavening products and all honey, lo saktir rimenu ishel Hashem. You shouldn't use in a korban for Hashem. Now the word or, it comes somewhere else. It came in the Parsha of Bo, in the book of Shemos. And it says, talking about Pesach, Shivas Yomim Seor Lo Yomotze B'Vatechem. For 7 days during the Passover holiday, you shouldn't find any leaven in your house. And it's a very severe penalty for somebody who has leaven, that the Torah goes on to make. What is the connection between these two things? What is the connection between not having seor in a korban mincha and not having it on Pesach? Well, the Netivot Shalom brings down an interesting comment, and he brings it in the name of the Rabbi from Kufrin. He says, and the Baal Shem Tov also says this, that sor, leavening, is merames al gayus. It hints at pride. And davash, merames al inyane tava. And honey, referring to sweet things, as Rashi says, shenafsho shel adam mechamdason, refers to our over desire for corporal things, material things, things that don't have to do with spirituality, things that don't help us. Now it's interesting. When we're now in a period of, a lot of us are in isolation, a time for self-introspection. The Torah is telling us that if you want to come close to God, you can't do it with seor. You can't do it with leaven. You can't do it with pride. You can't do it by being narcissistic. This is a time, through our introspection, we can think about, what are we doing? What are we supposed to be doing in this life? How are we to deal with other people? We know now that the world is one. Those who were former enemies can't be enemies in this fight against a deadly virus. So the question is, what do we do? Do we continue to be haughty and prideful? The Parsha begins with Vayikra el Moshe. The word Vayikra ends with an aleph, but it's a small aleph. If you look in the Torah, it's written smaller than the other letters. And the sages tell us that the reason for that is because Moses did not want to look like a haughty person. He didn't really want to even put the word Vayikra in there. It's a designation of honor. He was the humblest of all people. So Hashem says, no, you got to put it in. I'm telling you, this is what you write. Okay, so he put the aleph in, but he did it diminutively, very small. Part of his humility. What Hashem wants from us is humility. When we eat the matzah is representing the eating of the Korban Pesach, sacrificial lamb in the days of the temple. We no longer have that. We can't, there's a Gemara that says if there's two people eating the Paschal offering, and one is doing it because of love of God and wanting to fulfill the mitzvah, and the other is doing it because, wow, this is a good meal, I'm just going to do it for my gluttonous appetite. They're doing the same thing, but one gets a mitzvah and one doesn't, even though doing the same thing. So the way you do something counts. Your intentions count. How we deal with our fellow Jews and our fellow human beings, that counts. Let's try to avoid being like the employer that I mentioned a moment ago at the beginning, who had to show his power over a lesser employee. One thing that the aleph shows is that we're all small. We all think we know so much. We know now that we don't know anything at all. I mean, Reb Shlomo Carlebach used to always say, what do we know? What do we know? Sometimes it takes a horrible event, as we're all experiencing right now, to show that. But we can turn it into a positive. We can turn it into a positive by working on ourselves, making ourselves better people, being more concerned with our fellow human beings, going out of our way to help them. And Baruch Hashem, I see that happening throughout the world, where people are bending over backwards, going out of themselves, going out of their comfort zones to help others. And that's what we have to do. We have to do this without seor, without leavening, without narcissistic feelings, without thinking only of ourselves. Let's think of everybody else. As Rabbi Akiva says, "V'ahavta l'reach kamocha ze klal gadol b'Torah." Loving your neighbor as yourself, that's an integral part of the Torah. Loving your neighbor as yourself. And I once heard an interpretation of this. I may have shared it with you, where it says in Pirkei Avos, "Ezehu asher hashomeach bechelko." Who is rich? He who is happy with his portion of life, who is satisfied with his portion of life. That's the general translation. But the translation, the words that I heard about it was, he who is rich, he who is happy with his neighbor's portion. Happy with what's happening to your neighbor. If good things are happening to your neighbor, that's a reason to be happy. I wish all of us a Chodesh Tov. This is the month of Geula, of redemption. We have to bring the redemption right now. We can do it by our acts. Let's get rid of the seor before Pesach. Let's not have any leavening. Let's enter this Pesach and be able to be people who are caring people. Thank you so much for listening on behalf of the webyeshiva.org. I wish everybody Chodesh Tov and Shabbat Shalom.